The framed poster's signature in the bottom right corner was real, Dean's own hand from 20 years earlier, and Dean remembered exactly who he'd signed it for, where and why, down to the second. Wait, because what Dean would learn in the next 30 minutes about why that poster was being sold on a Los Angeles sidewalk would leave him crying in the middle of the street, and it would reveal a truth nobody else knew. Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles was busy that October afternoon in 1994. The California sun cast long shadows across the Walk of Fame stars. Tourists snapped photos. Families strolled past shop windows. Street musicians occupied corners. The smell of hot dogs from a corner vendor mixed with exhaust fumes and passing perfume. Dean Martin had been in LA for 3 days recording new material, but that afternoon he'd decided to walk alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, wearing dark sunglasses and casual clothes, jeans, a light jacket, nothing that screamed celebrity. He'd passed dozens of street vendors without stopping, accustomed to seeing his image on bootleg posters and unauthorized merchandise sold on streets across America. But this poster was different. First, because it was authentic. One of the official prints from 1974 promoting his album Once in a While. Second, because it was professionally framed in a wooden frame that, though old and scratched, showed someone had valued it enough to protect it. And third, because that signature in the corner wasn't a fake. It was genuine. It was his. Dean approached slowly, removing his sunglasses for a better look. The elderly man selling the items glanced up without immediately recognizing him. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked in a tired voice. The voice of someone who'd spent too many hours offering things nobody wanted to buy. Dean pointed at the poster. "That poster. How much are you asking for it?" The old man looked back as if he'd forgotten the poster was there. "Ah, that's Dean Martin. Very old. From 20 years ago. Signed by him personally." His voice carried a tone of pride mixed with sadness. "I'm asking $300. It's the last thing I have that's worth anything." Dean felt something tighten in his chest. $300 was less than what a decent restaurant meal cost. "Why are you selling it?" The old man sighed, looking at the poster with an expression Dean couldn't quite decipher. "Because I need money for medicine. My wife is sick and I've already spent everything I had. This poster is the only thing I have left that's worth something." Dean knelt to be at the old man's level. "How did you get that poster? How did Dean Martin sign it?" And then the old man began telling a story Dean would hear with growing emotion. "It was in 1974, in Las Vegas. I owned a small lounge off the strip. Nothing fancy. Just a place where locals came to drink and listen to music. We had a dozen tables. A small stage barely big enough for a piano and a microphone stand. Dim red lighting that hid the cigarette stains on the ceiling. It was called Harold's Haven, and it was mine for 12 years. The old man, whose name was Harold Fisher, remembered that night with perfect clarity despite the 20 years that had passed. His eyes focused on something far away, seeing it all again. One night, around midnight, on a Tuesday, slowest night of the week, Dean Martin walked in through the back door, not the front where everyone could see him, but the back, through the alley entrance. I usually kept locked. Somehow he knew to come that way. He looked exhausted, like he'd been driving for hours. His eyes were red. His hair wasn't perfect like you'd see on TV. He looked human, you know, tired and human. He asked if he could sit in the back room for a while. Said he just needed somewhere quiet to clear his head. I didn't ask questions. I brought him coffee and left him alone. After about an hour, he came out and asked if I had a stage. I said yes, a small one, and he asked if he could sing a few songs, just for himself, no audience. Dean listened without revealing his identity yet. Completely absorbed in this story, he also remembered, but from another perspective. But then something happened. Harold continued, his voice softening. I told him the lounge was closed for the night. We'd sent the last customer home an hour earlier. My bartender had already left, but if he wanted to sing, I'd stay and listen. I didn't know why I offered that. Maybe because he looked like he needed something I couldn't name. So he sang, just him and me in that empty lounge at 2 in the morning. I sat at the bar. The only lights on were the ones over the stage, casting this warm glow that made the rest of the room disappear into shadow. He didn't do anything fancy, didn't announce the songs or tell jokes between them like he did on TV. He just sang, "Everybody loves somebody first," and his voice filled that little room like it was Carnegie Hall. Then that's amore. And I swear I could hear every breath he took between phrases. He sang 4 or 5 songs total. Voltaire, memories are made of this. 1 or 2 others I can't remember now. But I remember how it felt. Like church almost. Like something sacred was happening. Harold laughed softly at the memory. When he finished, I told him I'd never heard anything so beautiful. He thanked me and said he'd needed that more than I could know. He said he'd been going through a rough time, felt disconnected from his music, and singing in that empty room reminded him why he'd started performing in the first place. Dean felt tears beginning to form behind his sunglasses. He remembered that night, remembered the bar owner who'd given him a safe space when his TV show had just been canceled, when critics were saying he was washed up, when he'd driven from LA to Vegas just to get away from the phone calls and the pity. Before he left, Harold continued, he took this poster from his car, said he always kept a few for promotion, and he signed it for me. He wrote, to Harold, for the best audience of one I ever had, keep the music alive. Dean Martin, 1974. And I kept it. I framed it with the first extra money I earned. I hung it in my lounge for years, and every time I looked at it I remembered that night when Dean Martin sang just for me in an empty room. Tears were running freely down Dean's face now. But Harold was so absorbed in his story, he didn't notice. And he was right to sign it. I kept that poster through everything. When I had to close the lounge in 1982, because the rent got too high and the neighborhood changed. When we moved to LA to be closer to our daughter, after our son died in a car accident. Through all the hard times these 20 years, and believe me, there were plenty, there were moments we desperately needed money. In 87 when our daughter got divorced and needed help with her kids. In 90, when I had to have surgery, and we didn't have insurance. But I never sold it. My wife would say, Harold, that poster could pay our rent for 2 months. And I'd say, I know, but I can't. That poster represented something more than money. It represented a moment of pure connection. Artist to listener. Nothing between them but the music. It represented the best of what it means to be human. 2 strangers sharing something beautiful for no reason, except that they both needed it. But now, he continued, his voice barely audible, my wife has cancer, and her treatments cost more than I can pay with my Social Security. I already sold the house 3 years ago, and we're renting now. I've sold almost everything we owned that had any value, and this poster is the last thing left. It breaks my heart to sell it, but I love my wife more than I love this memory. Dean couldn't hold back anymore. He removed his sunglasses completely, letting Harold see his face clearly for the first time. Harold, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm Dean Martin. I'm the man who sang in your empty lounge 20 years ago. Harold blinked, confused, looking at this man kneeling before him, comparing his face to the young man in the 1974 poster, and then recognition hit like a wave. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no words came out. It can't be, he finally whispered. Is it really you? Dean nodded, smiling through his tears. I never forgot that night. Never forgot your kindness when I needed it most. And now, 20 years later, I find you here selling the poster I gave you. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But there's something you need to understand, Harold. That poster isn't the last valuable thing you have. Your kindness is worth far more than any poster, and I'm not going to let you sell it. People were starting to stop around them, recognizing Dean, pulling out cameras, whispering excitedly, oh my God, that's Dean Martin. A woman said to her husband. Is that really him? Someone else asked. Within minutes, a circle of people had formed, maintaining a respectful distance, sensing they were witnessing something private. But Dean ignored them all completely. He pulled out his wallet and extracted all the cash he was carrying, counting it quickly. $3,200. This is for your wife's treatments, and tomorrow my manager is going to visit you to arrange for all her future medical bills to be covered. You're going to give me your address, and I'm going to make sure you never have to sell your memories again to take care of your family. Harold was crying openly now, unable to process what was happening. I can't accept this, he tried to say. It's too much. I didn't do anything special that night. I just gave you a quiet room. Dean took the old man's wrinkled hands in his. You gave me more than a quiet room. You gave me a space to remember who I was. You listened to me sing when I'd forgotten why singing mattered. That kind of gift is rare, Harold, and it changed my life more than you can imagine. That night, Dean explained as the crowd around them grew. People now filming with video cameras. Someone calling out, "We love you." Dean from the back. I was ready to quit. My show had been canceled after 9 years. Critics were writing articles about how my time had passed, how Vegas was moving on to younger, flashier acts. My second marriage was falling apart. I'd be divorced within the year. My kids barely knew who I was because I'd spent their whole lives on stages and in recording studios. I drove to Vegas that night thinking maybe I'd just disappear into the desert somewhere. Stop trying to be Dean Martin anymore, whoever that even was. He took a breath. The crowd silent now, hanging on every word. But then I met a bar owner who let me sing in his empty lounge, who listened like my voice still mattered, who didn't ask for autographs or photos, or tell me how great I used to be. You just listened. You accepted my poster like it was worth something, like I was worth something beyond the fame and the TV ratings. You made me feel like my music still had value, like I still had value as an artist, as a person. And that night, sitting in my car in your parking lot, after I left, I made a decision. I decided to keep going. One more day, then another, until I found my way back to why I started singing in the first place. So don't tell me you didn't do anything special. You helped me remember who I was when I was about to give up being that person. Harold shook his head, overwhelmed. I didn't know any of that. I was just being decent. Exactly, Dean responded. You were being decent, and that's the most special thing of all. He turned to his manager, who had miraculously appeared in the crowd, alerted by someone who'd recognized Dean. I need you to arrange something. Tomorrow you're going to visit Harold. You're going to pay all his medical debts. You're going to set up a fund to cover all his wife's future treatments, and you're going to give him a monthly check for $2,000, in addition to what he already gets from Social Security. The manager nodded, pulling out a notebook to take Harold's address, who remained in shock. But Dean wasn't finished yet. He took the framed poster, observing it carefully, seeing his own young signature from 20 years ago, reading the words he'd written, to Harold, for the best audience of one I ever had. Keep the music alive. This poster stays with you, he said firmly. It never gets sold. Never. It's a reminder that kindness always returns. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not the way you expect. But it always returns. He placed the poster back against the wall reverently, and added with a smile, now it's worth even more because it has a story. The story of how a bar owner gave a singer a quiet room, and 20 years later that singer returned when the bar owner needed him most. The crowd that had formed around them burst into applause. Someone had recorded the entire encounter on video, and by the next day the story would be on every news program in America. Dean spent the next 20 minutes talking with Harold, catching up on their lives, laughing about that night in the empty lounge 2 decades ago. Harold told him about his children, his grandchildren, his years running the bar. Dean told him about his career, the countries he'd visited, the concerts he'd given. But more than anything, they shared recognition of that strange and beautiful moment where their lives had crossed 20 years earlier, and were now crossing again. The next day, Dean's manager kept every promise. Harold's medical debts were paid completely. A fund was established to cover all his wife's future treatments. The monthly checks started immediately, and Dean personally visited Harold's small apartment, where he met his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and saw the empty space on the living room wall where the poster had hung for 20 years. I'm going to frame something better for that space, Dean promised. A week later, a large package arrived. Inside was a new poster, bigger, more modern, with a recent photo of Dean, and a dedication that read, "To Harold and his family, with eternal gratitude for a quiet room that saved my music, Dean Martin, 1994. But it also included the original 1974 poster, now with a second protective frame, and a plaque explaining the story of that night. The story became legendary. It's told in LA, shared on radio programs, used as an example of karma, of kindness that returns, of how small acts of humanity can have impacts that resonate across decades. Harold lived another 6 years after that encounter, and during that time he never had to worry about money for medicine. Dean made sure of that, and when Harold died in 2000, Dean attended the funeral, where he spoke about the bar owner who taught him that true greatness isn't in fame, but in giving someone a quiet room when they need it most. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. And if you want to hear what happened the night Dean walked into another stranger's life and changed it forever, tell me in the comments.